Good morning everyone and welcome to today's State of the Service Roadshow event. My name is Phil Lancaster and I work at the Australian Public Service Commission here in Canberra. Today's event has a very different look and feel to our usual approach to this event series, but I very much hope that you'll find the next 70 minutes or so informative and engaging and perhaps even inspiring. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land here in Canberra that I'm speaking from this morning. I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to the traditional custodians on whose country you are participating from, as well as to their elders and any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who might be participating in today's event. Before I get into the detail of today's event, did you know that the APS as an institution has its own presence on social media? So if you're interested in keeping up to speed on things across the service, I'd encourage you to follow us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter and on Instagram. Details of those platforms are coming up on the screen now. So this is a whole series of events right across Australia, starting with the Canberra launch event which took place in February, and it took place in the former House of Representatives chamber in Old Parliament House in Canberra. Video from that event is available on the Apsc website, and I do encourage you to check it out if you have a moment. At that event, you'll hear from the Honourable Ben Morton MP, Assistant Minister to the Minister for the Public Service, addressing the APS on the great work that was done throughout 2020, and also announcing details about the new APS Academy and the upcoming APS exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy. There's also a presentation from APS Commissioner Peter Woolcott on the state of the service in 2020. We've also had a number of state-based events, and it's been really great to see the strong engagement from APS colleagues thus far around Australia. We usually do face-to-face events, so a purely virtual approach is not our preference, but there's no doubt that it has enabled many more people to participate. And to complement today's event, you can also find state-based statistical slideshows on the state of the service on the APSC website. So this event will be in two parts. Firstly, we'll have a Q&A session with First Assistant Commissioner Pat Hetherington from the Australian Public Service Commission to answer questions submitted by the virtual audience via Slido. And we'll then move to the second part of the event, which is a panel discussion on the topic of spirit of service. We have three of our New South Wales-based colleagues who've agreed to talk a bit about what it means for them to be APS employees and to give some personal reflections on the last 12 months. Then we'll go to a Q&A session with the panel where they'll answer some pre-prepared questions, but also questions from the virtual audience via Slido. And that's it for the introductions. So I'm very pleased to welcome First Assistant Commissioner Pat Hetherington to answer all your questions as part of this first Q&A session. Thanks, Pat.
The first question up there is, can you give more info on the Surge Reserve and how do we join? So the Surge Reserve, how we're envisaging that coming together, it's really, we were looking for about 3,000 to 4,000 volunteers who would be able to deploy for short periods of up to about 8 weeks in the event of an unforeseen crisis. So a large crisis that requires an immediate response. It's generalist in nature, so no specific skill sets being called for as a part of the surge. The best way to get involved in the surge, there'll be information on the APSC's website, but also through your HR areas in your own agencies. They'll have the details of how you volunteer. From the APSC's perspective, we provide a bunch of information to our surge reservists and would certainly welcome people putting their hand up to join that. I suppose the next question that's up on the board is about how APS employees outside Canberra will access the APS Academy. I guess the sense there, whilst there is a physical presence at Old Parliament House, as we have for the last year, quite a bit of the L&D opportunities will be done virtually. We'll seek to strike the right balance between face-to-face delivery for those things that better lend themselves to face-to-face delivery, but there will be a huge array of online offerings so that people will be able to access the academy in that way. I'm looking up at the next set of questions here. Government wants to achieve the extraordinary. Are there plans to lift the ASL cap? Well, I can tell you there are no plans at this point that I'm aware of to lift the ASL cap. I think it's important to know that it's a reasonably long-standing government policy around ASL. It's not something that's controlled by the Public Service Commission. It is a Department of Finance controlled policy. But the key to achieving the extraordinary is really prioritisation. I mean, we've seen that in the last year. It's really being clear about what are those key government priorities and going after those priorities and being quite ruthless about how we do that. And then I think if we're very clear about what they are, then we can alleviate some of the pressure that people are feeling to get things done. That's not the only answer, but certainly it's a key point in achieving the extraordinary. How do we solve the disconnect between Canberra and the rest of Australia, e.g. the Canberra bubble? Well, you know, I think if the last year has taught us anything, is that we can actually operate in a different way. I think we've done that extremely successfully over the course of the last year. Virtual engagement has worked for us. You've seen, I've read out to you some of the results that we've seen through census and surveys. Actually, there's been people's perception is that communication's actually improved over this period. So I think we've taken some great steps forward throughout the course of the pandemic to really break down the bubble, to really break down the perceived barriers between that Canberra bubble and states and territories. And I expect that will continue on into the future. So one of the questions up here is, with the APS Academy, will there be courses, units on Indigenous cultural competency and data? I expect so, is my answer at the moment, noting that we're still developing the course content for the APS Academy, but certainly cultural competency is an important part of what we do as public servants. You would have seen, if you haven't, I encourage you to read the workforce strategy that sets out our plans for the APS workforce, and it will require cultural competency. So we're going to have a really hard look at how we build that in our people, and I expect the APS Academy will probably play a lead role in that. What is your view on moving leadership roles away from Canberra to allow leaders from other jurisdictions, such as New South Wales, to move into the SES? You know, this is sometimes a challenging question, but I think it's probably fair to say there are already an awful lot of SES roles that live outside of Canberra. If you look at places like Service Australia, if you look at places like the ATO, there are an awful lot of SES roles in Sydney, in Brisbane, in Melbourne, for example. But Canberra is where our ministers come. Canberra is where question time in Parliament is held, and as you move into those SES roles, your involvement in those sorts of activities becomes increased. And there is a benefit to having some of those SES roles in Canberra, and I think that will remain into the future. But I do think we're seeing more and more SES roles that can be conducted from outside of Canberra, and with the gains that we've made around virtual connectivity, I don't expect that that's going to decrease into the future. Just having a look at the next set of questions. Some of these are sort of the same themes to the one that I've already answered. Okay, so why the salary hold for all public servants? Is that fair? So I think as public servants, it's really, really important that we have an understanding of what the community is experiencing. And I think when the decision was made to put on a hold on public service pay rises, it was absolutely appropriate. There were people in the community losing their jobs and really doing it tough. And, for us to have continued to take pay rises as a part of public service, I don't think would have been necessarily in keeping faith with the Australian population. So I actually think those moves to delay pay rises for public service employees was entirely appropriate. Those delays were a 6-month delay, and there's been no announcement that suggests that after that 6-month delay we won't start to see public service salary payments coming through again. Next question up on the board is, what about contractors who seem to be more and more in the workforce? Will that trend continue? I'd answer that by saying there will always be a place for a contracted workforce in the public service. It takes an awful lot of varied skills and disciplines to be able to deliver on what we need to deliver on. Not all of those are resident in the public sector, and so we do rely on a contracted workforce to deliver on some of those things. Often for short-term work, it is more cost-effective, more efficient to buy in a skill set that we don't need to maintain in the long term in the public service. But it is fair to say that we need to be looking for those opportunities to transfer skills and knowledge from contractors into permanent public servants as we use a contracted workforce to assist in delivering all the things that we need to deliver for government and for the Australian community. All right. What do you think is the biggest strength and biggest weakness, development opportunity of the APS? So one of the things, and this is probably personal perspective more than anything else, one of the things that I saw in the response to COVID-19 as, I guess, an area where the public service can lift and grow. Throughout COVID-19, we were really willing to engage in risk. We were really willing to make judgment calls on things and prove to ourselves that we can do those things effectively. We responded very rapidly to things. We obviously used data and information to determine risks and manage risks well, but we engaged in risks. And in some ways, we're perhaps more entrepreneurial throughout that period. That's the thing that I would like to see continue in the public sector. There are many other things, many other areas of development, but I think we performed particularly well through COVID-19, and those for me were key features of why we performed as well as we did. What is the biggest impact that we saw on the APS survey census as a result of COVID-19? I think we might follow up that question. So in a positive respect, the biggest result that we've seen is people's commitment to service. I think that's pretty fair to say. Pretty much everybody has said they feel more committed to the work and they can see that direct link that they have with the Australian public sector. But there have been some other areas. It's important when you look at the census results that you kind of look at the whole and you don't just cherry pick the positive. There are certainly some areas where we can improve. And I think those census results will be out and everybody will have an opportunity to have a look at them. And I'd encourage you within your own workplaces, as you get the census results and as you start to pull them apart, really seek to understand them and figure out what you're going to do in your own workplace to improve where you need to and to maintain the gains that we've made throughout COVID-19. Will there be a focus on community stakeholder engagement in academy training to ensure policy development and delivery is connected? Yeah. So I think the short answer to that is yes. So there is no doubt that at the forefront of our minds as we develop the piece of work around policy development, actually understanding how policy plays out on the ground, actually understanding how, what the lived experience of Australians is as a result of our policy development will be a key focus. So we'll be pretty keen to make sure that we pick that up in the training that we deliver through the academy. What's the bottom one? With all this surging, will the APSC direct departments to reassess work values of roles, as many are now performing at a high level without a promotion? I think the answer to that is probably not. I think what we've seen is throughout the surge between workforces, we've seen, particularly if I take Services Australia as an example, we seconded people from a lot of different agencies at a lot of different levels to go and perform similar work within Services Australia under secondment arrangements. So you had a mixed team EL1s, EL2s, APS3s, APS4s, etc., people were not asked to do work that was above their level in that context. So, but it's fair to say that you had people at higher levels doing work that ordinarily they wouldn't be doing. And the benefit in that is actually you get these great combinations of teams where level doesn't matter, and you get people engaging and talking and learning from each other. So I think we take those positives away from it, but I think it's unlikely that we're going to do a wholesale reassessment of work values of roles anytime soon. So the top one at the moment is APS have delivered so much for the community. What advice do you have for APS employees struggling to cope with their workload? Look, I think there's an awful lot in this question. If I give a generic answer, it would be really work with managers, supervisors to understand what your priorities are. I've said it before, but I think prioritisation of work in this particular time period and with all the challenges that we're facing is really critical to making sure that what we have is sustainable. The work that we have can be managed by the workforce we have to deliver on that. If the work that you're working on is critical work and of the highest priority of government, then there are options for surging into different departments, as I've discussed previously around the surge reserve. So additional resources can be provided to those areas of highest priority. But in the first instance, it's really about trying to prioritise your workload, working with supervisors, working with managers to understand what can be set aside, what can be done later, and how do you focus on what's absolutely critical now. Do you see working from home to be the norm for the APS long into the future? So, it's an interesting question. I would say we've always had flexible working arrangements, or for a very, very long time we've had flexible working arrangements in the APS. I think if I remember back to previous census results, it was something pre-COVID census results, it was something like 22% of our workforce were engaged in some form of flexible working arrangement. So I do, that will absolutely continue into the future. Flexible work is pretty key to our ability to stay an employer of choice, to continue to attract and retain people into the public service. It's certainly a key element of some of our diversity strategies, and it will feature in the forthcoming workforce strategy as well. The key thing about working from home in particular is making sure that we can maintain the productivity that we need to deliver for Australians. So, the working from home arrangements can continue to be negotiated between employees and managers within agencies. But we do need to keep a wary eye on just making sure we are delivering the things that government needs us to deliver. Right. What is the APSC doing about integrity? Is online training enough? Look, I think online training is certainly a start, and particularly if the online training is well developed and it's engaging and it really gives people a sense about what does integrity mean in the public service context. I'd say, though, that will have to be complemented by training done within an agency. So, for example, the notion of integrity as an APS 4 in Border Force is not the same as the notion of integrity as an SES officer running a large-scale procurement for billions of dollars. And so I think there'll need to be a bit of work that is done to contextualise integrity within different environments. But certainly online training is never enough. You always have to think about how do you train, how do you implement, how do you practice this in the workplace to complement any online training, and we're looking pretty closely at how we're going to do that. The 80% of APS work in one agency, yet the skills in a range of work streams are transferable. Any plans to make transfers between agencies like the Surge Reserve? So I might answer that question just in the context of mobility broadly. I think we are looking at a couple of specific use cases for mobility where it makes sense to do that. Before I talk about mobility, I just say it's very easy to say everyone should move around, but actually we can't forget the inherent value in having deep specialists in particular areas or deep domain specialists. So mobility is not for the sake of mobility. When I think about mobility, I think about, as I said, a couple of use cases. First is the surge. So we've got the surge reserve, and that really is this pool of generalists who can be there to assist in the early stages of something that we have to respond to. If I set that to one side, probably the other couple of use cases that I think about is how do we use mobility as an opportunity to build capability in the public service? That can be at an individual level, so we identify people who we think would benefit from moving to a different department, looking at a different sort of policy matter, where we're going to kind of build their knowledge about how things are done in the public service more broadly. You could have that as groups, so we're looking pretty closely at how we facilitate rotations of graduates through service delivery organisations. So how do we take people who might be a policy person in Prime Minister and Cabinet, give them an opportunity to work in a Services Australia context so that they can be that step closer to serving the public. So all of those things help to build capability. I suppose the other way we look at it is through the lens of task forces. So how do we give people an opportunity to come together on a specific problem, a specific policy issue, where we're trying to get in diverse skills, bring them together in the context of a task force, really work through what could be a complex or nasty problem, leveraging all of those diverse perspectives to solve that issue. So they're the kind of three use cases: surge, task forces, and sort of individual capability building opportunities that we think about in the context of mobility. And we're going to look to put out, probably towards the end of the next month or so, some really good guidance on how people can take that opportunity and really use those opportunities for mobility across those three use cases. How do you intend to retain high-performing employees within APS when contracting roles often offer 3 times the salary? This is not a new problem by any stretch of the imagination. We've been grappling with this for quite some time. I think if you think about the things that attract people to an organisation, salary is certainly one of those things. But more and more, what you see in sort of survey results about those things that attract are workplace culture, their flexible work arrangements, they're certainly the mission. And I think we really need to focus on some of those other elements. Public servants are reasonably well remunerated, not like some of the private sector remuneration that you receive, but actually we have a pretty interesting work environment. I think you'd find it very difficult in the private sector to find the real breadth and diversity of things that we do in the public sector. We need to leverage some of that. You can actually make a difference. So the things that we do, they're not about profit and loss. And I don't want to oversimplify the private sector because it's absolutely fundamental to the country as well. They're not about profit and loss. They're about serving Australians. So it's a hell of a mission that we've got. And I think that is a really big draw card for bringing people and keeping people in the public service. And workplace culture. So we do offer flexible work arrangements. We are an organisation that seeks to reflect the community that it serves. And so as we move ever closer to kind of embedding our diversity strategies, we will have the right environment that I think is able to attract and retain people, almost irrespective of some of those salary differences. So differing salaries in different agencies has impacts on mobility. How do we address those issues? Look, again, those issues have been around for a long time, and to be perfectly honest, I hear it a lot, but actually it's not how in practice it plays out. There's lots of mobility between agencies, particularly in Canberra, where the different agency salaries have had little impact on people's likelihood to move between agencies. Certainly in the use cases that I've described, they're ordinarily undertaken under secondment arrangements where the home agency continues to pay the salary of the person who's undertaking a mobility opportunity. And so in practice, the differing salaries, I haven't seen it actually play out as the problem that people often think it is. Particularly, look at the surge into Services Australia. That was the least of the concerns that we had in deploying people into that environment. So I think we can overinflate the importance of, or the impact that those differing salaries have on agencies, on people's desire to move between agencies. So I might take one more question. So while online learning can be useful, face-to-face learning is very beneficial. How will the APSC enable and deliver face-to-face training outside of Canberra? Look, I couldn't agree more personally. I think there are certainly some forms of training that lend themselves to virtual delivery, and there are other forms of training that lend themselves to face-to-face delivery. If I was to pick an example, I think some of the leadership offerings that we have, a lot can be done virtually, but there is a real benefit to having teams working together, bringing teams together, that networking piece, sitting around a table, nutting out problems together. I think there is a real benefit to that as one example. It's probably fair to say we're still looking to how we'll deliver outside of Canberra in a face-to-face environment beyond COVID-19. But one of the things that I think about is how do we actually use this vast network that is the public service to more effect in delivering L&D opportunities to our people. It doesn't need to be the Public Service Commission that's out across the country delivering this training. Actually, there are some really, really good training opportunities within agencies. And part of what we're looking at is who does things well. So does Services Australia, are they the best at service delivery, and do we suggest that they provide service delivery training to APS employees? A lot of this will unfold as we pull together the academy, but I think there's a lot more opportunity to leverage the inherent strengths of different agencies that are placed across the country to help build the capability of APS employees. So that was the last question. Thank you so much for spending this time with me this morning. And if we've got questions up that people have put through that we haven't answered, we might see if we can respond to those in due course and probably put something up on the web. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And look, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us here this morning. And there was one comment that actually I'll just note that came through on Slido, which was thank you for your honesty. Great stuff. So I think that, thank you for being open in the way you've answered those questions. We are now going to move into the second part of this morning's event, and that's the panel discussion on the topic of spirit of service. And that's something that Pat has actually touched on a couple of times as he was answering the questions that have already come through over Slido. And it's something that we're going to look to really emphasise, but also unpack a bit with our panellists this morning. So just as on Slido, there were a lot of questions there. What we've done is that we have archived all of the questions that came through for that first part of the session this morning. We've kept a record of them, and as Pat said, we'll see if there's some way, even perhaps using our various social media accounts, that we can put out information that addresses some of the questions that we weren't able, that Pat didn't have time to answer this morning. So there's a clean slate on Slido now in advance of our panel discussion, which we're really hoping to use to focus on the personal experiences of our two panellists this morning and their personal reflections. So it's a good time for me to introduce our two panellists for today. Firstly, we have Katrina O'Donnell, who is joining us from Dubbo, where she works for the National Indigenous Australians Agency. Katrina is a Murawari woman, born and raised in Bourke. She has a really diverse career behind her, with stints in radio, in legal services, then with the Aboriginal Land Councils, then aged care and disability, and then child protection services. She's been with the National Indigenous Australians Agency for a bit over 4 years now, and she's currently an advisor for the Western New South Wales Regional Network with a focus on the Murdi-Paki region. So welcome, Katrina. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And our second panellist is Michael Druce, who's joining us from Sydney, where he is the Principal Technical Consultant for the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, or ANSTO. Now, ANSTO is probably one of the less well-known APS agencies, but the impact of its work, and indeed the impact of Michael's work, is really significant. Michael has played a pivotal role in developing Australia's capability to manufacture nuclear medicine that is used to diagnose a wide variety of cancers, heart disease, and other conditions. Michael was awarded a Public Service Medal at the beginning of 2020 in recognition of the contribution that he has made to this field. So welcome, Michael, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the way we're going to run the session is that I've got some pre-prepared questions for the panellists. And while we're going through those questions, we will hopefully get some questions coming in over Slido. And we will, oh, there's already one there now, but we won't go to that straight away. And so we'll have a sort of a pre-prepared segment, and then we'll move into more of a conversation with Michael and Katrina. So the first question that I'm going to put to you both, and we'll go to you first, Katrina, and then to Michael, is on this topic, spirit of service, which has come up a little bit already in what Pat has spoken about when he commented that what we do in the APS is not about profit and loss. It's more about serving Australians. So, Katrina, I'll just ask you to reflect briefly from your own experience on that topic, spirit of service.
Sure. Spirit of service, I believe, is embedded in me and complements my personality. I would probably say that I'm more emotionally guided in my work. I've lived in remote communities, and my passion to provide service in these communities is something I'm really passionate about. I believe I am working in the community, listening to the community's concerns and raising these concerns where they need to be heard. Working in the community to also co-design with the community is a true representation of spirit of service for me. I also believe trust and being authentic and essential in our daily work follows through. In context with the department's role in fostering the spirit of service, it's clearly defined, I guess, in our corporate plan. There are many accountable key performance indicators. There's a lot of community consultation at the moment around the voice and co-design. And we have, what I would like to say is we also have leaders in our department that are inspiring. So personally, I have a regional manager and a senior advisor that share my passion for community, and this makes me love my job, but it also makes me feel like I have a voice in the department.
Excellent, thank you, Katrina. Michael, over to you.
Thank you. I guess, yes, spirit of service. I mean, for me, it's really been about serving the community, getting the medical isotopes out on time and reliably. And I think it's been a wonderful effort for me, particularly in the early days. We used to visit a lot of hospitals and clinics, meet the doctors, meet the patients, and if you've never visited a nuclear medicine centre at a major hospital or at a clinic, there are a lot of very sick people there. It's just a wonderful feeling to be able to help those people.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, get on.
I think what's clear from what you've both said, and I think we might be having just a couple of audio issues, so apologies if people are struggling to hear, but if we are just trying to sort that out. But what's clear from what you've both said is the connection to the community and the really clear link that you both see between the work you're doing and how that meets the needs of, and in some cases, really, very different needs for the work that you're both doing, but very significant needs that people are facing. So I guess the next question then for both of you, and we might go to Michael first on this one, is what prompted you to join the APS?
It was really just an available job at the time. I'd been working up in central Queensland, and I moved to Sydney for family reasons, and I needed a job, and this job became available. And I really, honestly, that was 40 years ago. I didn't expect to stay working in anything like this length of time, but it's just been a challenging, interesting job, and I've enjoyed it very much, and it gives me a lot of personal satisfaction. So, it wasn't really I was looking for a career with the public service or with a government agency. I was just looking for a job, really.
Okay, excellent. So, look, apologies. Apparently, we are having some technical issues with the audio. I can hear both Michael and Katrina perfectly, but apparently some people are having some issues with that. So we're just trying to address it. But what we will do, I'll remind you that we're recording this and it will be available on the website afterwards. So please do stay with us because we're going to keep going with the conversation, and worst case scenario, you'll be able to hear it after the fact. And again, we just had some thunder rumbling in the background here in Canberra, so don't be alarmed if you do hear that in the background as well. I guess it just goes to show that you can control for a lot of factors, but in this new environment where live streaming is a new approach we're using more and more, it's you can't control for everything. But yeah, Katrina, let's put that question to you as well. What prompted you to? You've obviously had quite a diverse background. What prompted you to join the APS?
Well, that's it. That's interesting because I believe that my roles in my working career have led me to the position I am in today. Working, like you mentioned earlier, in law and education, housing and health, gave me a good transition into the department. I've always been passionate about Aboriginal affairs and making a change and being a voice for my people. And this is where I truly believe I am making a difference. Before joining the department, I had known people that had worked in the agency and I was encouraged to apply. Before I did, I looked up, the mission statement for PMC, Indigenous Affairs, which was what we were called before, National Indigenous Australians Agency. And I was very much aligned with their statement. And having a chance to be involved in the department and having the opportunity to be on the ground and have a chance of changing policy based on what we hear on the ground and in our communities is something that I was encouraged to come into the APS.
Okay, excellent. That's an interesting point you've just raised though, Katrina, because we sometimes hear about a sense of disconnect between people who are on the ground and those who are developing the policy. And I'd be interested in your thoughts actually on that, because it sounds, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like that maybe hasn't been your experience.
Yeah, I would say what I find here is I always go back to, I listen to my mother-in-law when she used to speak, and she'd say back in the day they would have to travel, get in cars, borrow money for petrol, and travelling cars with no air conditioning to chase up a minister just to get their concerns about the communities back in the 70s. And I love hearing those stories because what I take in this role is I think I don't need to do, I actually have a great channel that goes straight up, from our regional managers to our CEO, that those voices are getting heard, and I'm in a very fortunate position.
Excellent. So next question for both of you is, looking back over your APS career, what has been your proudest moment? So Michael, I might throw to you first for this one.
Oh boy. There's been a few big moments, I guess. Probably the proudest moment would be we put in a plant to manufacture molybdenum-99, which is an isotope which is involved in probably 80% of nuclear medicine plants worldwide, and we put one in at Anstow in the mid-2000s, which not only supplied Australia but had a big impact on worldwide supply to that isotope as well. But that was probably the proudest moment. I think I would, probably the moment that moved me the most was some years ago now. one of the hospitals in Sydney wanted an isotope and an urgent delivery on a Friday afternoon. And we had no one to deliver it, so I actually delivered it myself. And honestly, I was a bit annoyed, to be honest, because I thought they'd just forgotten to order it. And I went in, and there was a lady who looked very sick, and the young technician that was working back to administer the isotope said, "Oh, her husband wants to thank you," and it meant that the lady's treatment could start 3 days earlier than if it had been left to the next week. So that was a very moving moment for me. So.
Look, thanks for sharing that, Michael, because I think that it goes to one of the things that we're really trying to do with this series of events and also the panel discussions, which is to unpack some of the breadth and the huge diversity of ways in which APS employees do, often in almost invisible ways, do serve the community and have a direct impact on them. At our launch event last Friday, we had a former DFAT First Assistant Secretary from the consular area who spoke about relatively junior DFAT employees volunteering to go to the border between Syria and Iraq to pick up unaccompanied minors who had been orphaned as a result of who were Australian citizens but who'd been orphaned as a result of the conflict over there. And again, it's not something that you necessarily associate with a career in the APS or with the work of public servants, but it is just another example. So actually, Michael, I will say, as I was reading up in preparation for this, I read a comment from the CEO of ANSTO who said that something like estimated 110 million people worldwide have benefited from the production of nuclear medicine during your time at ANSTO. So
yes, that's out of that plant that I mentioned. That worldwide, yeah. It's hard to estimate numbers because radioisotopes, and particularly medical ones, they have short half-lives, so they decay away very quickly. So you've got to make some assumptions in those numbers, but it's in that order. Yes.
Yeah. Would it be safe to say that you didn't anticipate that at the start of your APS career, that having that sort of role?
No, I didn't. I didn't. As I said, I didn't really expect to have a long career there, but it's been. I mean, I have a science degree. I'm not a clerical type person at all, and it's been wonderful to be able to use that to create, essentially diagnostic agents which have helped people.
Mm. And Katrina, over to you. That question: what about the proudest moment during your APS career?
Okay, there's a couple. One of my proudest moments was co-facilitating with the Barkindji traditional owner PBC for a ranger program. So we worked together, we came together, we ran 3 forums, and out of those community consultations we were able to have a community consensus on the Barkindji traditional owner were best in line to take on the ranger program. So that was pretty exciting. And also helping develop a food service in Wilkenya during the first wave of COVID, and I'll talk a bit about that soon. That was extremely rewarding work. And most recently being accepted into the ANU management program. We're a pilot program of 25 Indigenous staff that was selected across Australia. And being in the room and studying with all these inspirational APS 6 NIAA workers is pretty inspiring. So that's it. Other than that, I'm proud of the work I do each day in the communities I work in.
Excellent, and I think that's a really interesting but also important insight, because perhaps we do have a tendency to look at the really huge moments, the significant interactions that we might have in the course of our careers, but so much of what we do forms part of the fabric of governance or of service delivery or of regulation or of whatever it might be across Australia, and a lot of it only gets noticed when something goes wrong, whereas it's on a daily basis where people are doing things right, that these things are actually making a difference to the lives of Australians. Let's move on to the next question, which is about resilience. So we've all faced situations in the workplace or at work in our careers that have tested us, I imagine. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Michael and Katrina, on how you've managed your own resilience when you're dealing with difficult situations and difficult work situations, and anything you might have, any lessons you might have learnt along the way. We might go to Katrina first on that one.
Yep. Working from home in Broken Hill at the height of COVID was a bit challenging. Felt very isolated, so I was fortunate enough to have the support here in the office, in our WA regional office, so that was really good. I guess it's hard when you have to be able to take on the frustrations from the community, especially in this uncertain time. And it comes from a place of passion, and that's kind of how I guess I look at it when people aren't happy with us, and I try not to take it personally. So I always try to foster respect, and I think this comes through in my engagement skills and the work that I do. And I think it comes down to following through what you say you're going to do, and you actually do it, and that's crucial in maintaining relationships in the community. And I guess I sort of learnt, that you need to reach out and ask for support a little bit more than what probably had previously. And I have some really great work friends, so it was handy.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Michael, what about you?
Oh, the greatest difficulties. There's a number in the work that I do, but I think probably over the years, the one that keeps rearing its head is that is the timeliness of response. In making medical isotopes, what we make today gets shipped overnight around Australia and used tomorrow. So any delay in that means there's patients missing out on getting it, and that sort of rapid time response, even to solving problems when something breaks down or the like, is probably not endemic even within the ANSTO organisation itself. So you've had to rely on relationships a lot to get things done with other people in the place. So I think that's probably been the biggest difficulty. There are times when you have to sort of, I feel, make yourself into a bit of a bastard, for want of a better word, to get things done, just to get the emphasis of the timeliness involved across. So yeah, that would be my biggest difficulty. I think we're a bit, what I've done is a bit unusual. I know it's a bit outside the line of the mainstream public service type work, but and it doesn't naturally fit, I think, into the public service, but it's been something that ANSTO has provided as a service to Australians for many years.
And something which then is part of, and I don't want to overuse the expression, but becomes part of the rich fabric of the public service. And even I thought it was interesting that Pat emphasised when he was talking about people involved in service delivery. We do think about service delivery perhaps as being much more the front line, people engaging directly with the community at shop fronts or call centres, but weapons assessors and instructors and museum employees, there's a huge range of different roles in the APS which are delivering services to Australians. And so again, I guess that's one of the things that we are trying to highlight through these sort of discussions is to showcase that. So The last of the pre-prepared questions before we move to some coming through on Slido. And please don't, for people listening, please don't hesitate to put questions to Michael and Katrina, either to both of them, or we've got a couple there which are sort of more targeted at one or the other. So the last of the pre-prepared questions, what was something positive in your work or in your workplace that came out of the response to COVID-19? So Katrina, you've spoken about something of the difficulty of being isolated at home in Broken Hill. But now let's flip that and think about and talk about the positives that came out of it. And because obviously in what the comments that Pat Hetherington made earlier, he drew out some great examples of innovation and responsiveness. And I'd be interested in your perspective on that. So maybe we'll start with you again for this one, Katrina.
Yeah, sure. I think in COVID, we strengthened a lot of our relationships with our stakeholder engagement. Sometimes we were talking daily, if not weekly, on the ground issues that were happening at the time. So we had border issues, and then we also had COVID itself. So in that time, a really positive story is I worked with, I was in Broken Hill, and I happened to see on social media that there was a couple in town that were doing meals for people, vulnerable people in the community in Broken Hill. So as I do, I'm always thinking about other people, and said, would you be interested in extending that service to Wilcannia and Menindee? And I got a call straight back, and the lady said, sure, we'd love to. So I said, okay, what do you need? So she needed a few things dropped off. They'd put up a Facebook post after that and said, hey, our neighbours in Wilcannia and Menindee are finding it hard. So people were scared in the communities. There was a lot of misinformation that was going around. So out of that, I contacted Monica, who is the Community Working Party Chair in Wilcannia, and she had... I said to her, look, I have a couple in Broken Hill that are interested in putting out some meals. Can you give me a rough number around some vulnerable people in the community? So she called me back and said, basically around 50 at that stage. So I contacted the couple back, and they said, yep, no worries, we'll have 50 ready. So that week, Monica was coming over because she comes over 2 days a week. So she came over on the Tuesday to grab the meals. And she took them back in the community, and she got all the family involved, and so they went and delivered all of the meals out in the community. And she said people's faces were just lit up. It was weeks before they'd even left the house because people were scared. Wilcannia's on a major road between Dubbo and Adelaide, so it's quite frequent, the traffic that goes through there. So people were happy to see it. People were happy to get a nice meal. Family members were getting respite. It just created this whole great atmosphere in the community. But not only that, the next day she called me and she said, do you know what, I think we can do this ourselves. And I said, yes, I have no doubt you can. I said, what do you need from me? And she said, well, I need some meat and I need some different things. So we used our connections in the community, and I had Phil Kickett working for us at the moment, at that time, and he had some great relationships as well. So we were able to get some meat and, bread from Coles and quite a bulk lot of meat. And then other people were coming involved as well. So by the next day, I reckon about lunchtime, we had about 4 or 5 different providers coming in, and then those meals continued in Wilcannia. So she got her family members all involved. It was totally a volunteer service. What was great about that was that the community was able to get information that was coming out with the meals as well, and that the police had come on board and said, hey, we'll deliver some meals as well. So they decided that they were going to use the meal program as an induction into the community. for the new officers that come into the community. So that was really good. So some really good positive things came out of that.
That's a fascinating example, because it sounds like it sounds like it's a great example, not of the top-down sort of program management and delivery coming from the APS, but more of a facilitation and a grassroots effort that you were able to really just assist and enable to happen. So it sounds like a really good model for for how to get things done in that sort of part of the world. And just for my own information, Katrina, what sort of the distances between these communities are significant. My geographical knowledge of Western New South Wales is not perhaps what it should be, but we're talking.
Kenya's a few hours away from Broken Hill. So Broken Hill is the hub between. So you've got Menindee, which is about an hour away, Durton, which is about 3.5 hours away, and Kenya's about 2.5 hours away. But then we've got Ivanhoe too, which is extremely isolated. And there, the roads have been fixed now, but that's a few hours drive too as well. But to go from Broken Hill to Dubbo, it's 8 hours.
Yeah, and so we're talking about people who are volunteering to actually do those journeys, to take to so that people can actually have access to that service. So it's a significant thing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Well, thanks heaps for sharing that example, Katrina. So, Michael, from your perspective, obviously a very different workplace, as you've already highlighted, but very different work context. But be interested to hear from you something positive that came out of the whole COVID-19 situation and response.
ANSTO's response to COVID was that, all non-essential, we sort of split the staff into essential and non-essential staff. And that's probably not a good wording for it, but people who had to be on site to do their work and people who could work from home. So the people that had to come into site were obviously the people running the reactor there and the isotope production and some of the security people. And they essentially split themselves into two teams of A and B teams. So they weren't on site at the same time. So in case there was any sort of transmission between them, you still had a team that was able to still work. So that worked very well for us, and that went on for quite a while. Working from home, I think, most people, including myself at this stage, work mainly from home. And that worked well. We set up, in some ways it was even a little bit better that we had, in my team, we had a twice weekly conference with Zoom, where everybody could speak and have their say and be informed as to what was going on. So I thought that worked very well and almost getting the team closer together in some ways than what we were at work. And during those calls, it was, very focused, very, very, I thought it was quite good. But we did manage to keep the whole site going. As soon as we were able to relax restrictions a bit, we did relax them, but still kept as many people as we could working from home.
Yeah, okay, excellent. So that's probably not dissimilar to a number of workplaces across the APS in terms of how they dealt with the COVID-19 restrictions. So we might go to some of the questions coming through on Slido, and I might throw the first one to you, Katrina, which is, what's the single most important thing that the APS can provide to Indigenous Australians? And I think there was another one in there as well, which I might roll into that one, which was specifically for you as well, Katrina, which is how can we inspire more young Indigenous people to consider joining the APS? So the sort of two halves to the question, what's the single most important thing the APS can provide to Indigenous Australians, but then what do we need to do to inspire more young Indigenous Australians to consider a career in the APS?
I guess providing quality funding and providing support to the communities is something that I would probably advertise, but also I guess we are getting better, I guess, as at advertising those positions. So we have quite a few different programs, employment programs that are targeted at young Indigenous leaders. So that's something that's out there. I guess what I would say to anybody that's wanting to get into the APS, I would say that you're coming into a workplace that's encouraging, supportive, that fosters growth, that you are trained and given the experience and that you need to do your job. You're working with amazing and inspiring people as well. And we do have the ability to make change.
And if I can just ask a follow-up to that, you've mentioned a couple of times now, so earlier you mentioned the importance of leadership within the workplace, and now you've just spoken about having, inspiring people to work with. From your own personal experience, are you able to share how that's impacted you, the impact that leaders or other inspiring people in the workplace have had on you?
Yeah, I guess going into an engagement role in previous roles, it was a small amount of engagement. It's quite a lot in this role, and just having those inspiring leaders. So going out and listening to my senior advisor do forums, listening to the regional manager, go out and do community consultations, and my work colleagues as well. That's inspiring. That's some amazing work that gets done out here in the region.
Okay. Michael, I've got a question which I'll put to you now, which is, so you said that really you just had a science degree and that was that was sort of the catalyst for your entry into the APS. Do we have enough? There's a question here saying, do we have enough scientists and technical experts coming into the APS?
Oh, I think it depends on the role of the organisation or part of the APS you're with, really. I think I can only really speak for ANSTO. I mean, we do have active campaigns. In the past, it's been to encourage more women to do what's now called STEM courses. We do have a graduate program where we take, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's probably in the order of about 20 graduates from university, and they go through a 2-year program at ANSTO working in different sections to get experience in different types of work and how they can apply themselves. I think, agencies like the CSIRO probably do similar types of things. So I think, where we do have the need for scientific people, we do a lot to encourage them and help their careers along.
Excellent. Another question here, a question for both of you, is what are some new skills that you have learnt over the course of your public service career? I might stick with you, Michael, for that one for the moment, and then go to Katrina.
New skills. It's just been such a long career. I'm just trying to think. Nothing in the last few years. Look, I've done a lot of presentations at international conferences that I wouldn't have done anywhere else. I think Australia is, in my field, is very well placed internationally. We have a a lot of kudos with overseas, and particularly within the Asian region, for being leaders in the field. So I think that's been very pleasing. I wouldn't have had that sort of experience, I don't think, working anywhere else. I certainly, over the years, I've had some fairly senior management roles within the organisation, and dealing with people and handling people has been, managing people in general. I think has been valuable experience that I've attained. I think, I'm really a bit. That would be the main thing. I think it's sort of working with people and understanding, different people have different needs and different reasons for working for the public service, I guess. And I think you've got to understand that and work with people. And I think, in my experience, most people have always tried to do the right thing, and that's been encouraging, I think, from a people point of view.
Yeah, great. No, that's fantastic. Thanks for that. I'm reminded of a comment by a Deputy Secretary at PM&C at our launch event last Friday, where her comment on why she joined the public service was because it was the only employer that would offer her a job with a Bachelor of Arts degree or something along those lines. And it was, and she was unapologetically blunt about the fact that it was not, a huge desire to serve the community. It was that she needed a job, and she needed a job in Canberra, and she got a job, and yet has developed that understanding of the serving role of the APS throughout the course of a long and significant career. So I think your comment about different needs and different reasons for working in the APS is a good one. Katrina, question for you. What are some new skills that you've learnt?
Well, I would say I often hear, think outside the box, and I don't think I can remember a time where I've ever thought inside the box, because we're always quick thinking, we're always being, reactive and being proactive. So I guess you're learning a new skill every day. Sometimes it could be your communication skills because every community is different. I've moved to Dubbo recently, so, I'm learning a whole heap of different information about some of the communities that are surrounding here as well. But, that's a skill that I think is important. Also, I'm learning lots of new skills with the ANU management program that I spoke about earlier. It's all about Aboriginal leadership and future pathways to higher positions within NIAA. So it's exciting. At the moment, we're learning a lot about law, about administrative law, and a whole heap of different government decision-making skills. So it's very interesting.
Excellent. Another question that has that's popped up on the screen there. So what about public servants who don't have a direct connection to the public and aren't saving people's lives? What should spirit of service mean to them? Now, I guess this is a difficult question to answer, but I guess both of you do have the privilege of having a very clear and visible connection to the community, or tangible connection to the community. What are your thoughts on other public servants who don't have that, and what should spirit of service mean to them, do you think? We'll go to Katrina. Yeah, thanks, Katrina.
Yeah, sure. Well, every community has I guess from our perspective, NIAA, every community has a cultural protocol. So I think if I was to say to somebody from a different department or a different organisation, I guess our role is to let people know who are the people to speak to in the community, and the majority of the time it's getting on ground and getting that information on the ground is what I would say to somebody that's not working in the space that I'm working in.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Michael, any thoughts from your perspective on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's called we call it the public service for a reason. It's providing a service. And I think most people in the community in general expect that those services to be provided. So I think even though haven't got the direct contact, you're performing a very valuable role, and you are enabling the people with the direct contact to be there and to do that. So I think it's people with the face-to-face contact with other people providing services can't do that without the backup administration. So I think it's very, very, very vital role, really. I think, and people just expect it to happen. And I guess you can feel like you're being ignored a bit at times, but really it's an essential role, and you've got to satisfy yourself that you're doing that role. I think that's essential.
Yeah, I guess it goes to understanding that whatever you're doing is contributing in some way, and perhaps it then just goes to having clear in your own mind exactly how you are contributing, and maybe even talking to people, colleagues and managers and other people around you to try and clarify and understand that better if you're having trouble to actually see that clear line of sight. Look, we're coming towards the end of the session, so I think we'll go to just one last question for both of you. There's a question on Slido, which is, what is your advice for graduates coming into the APS? I might rework that slightly and say, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self? One piece of advice that you would give your younger self early on in your APS career. If you could go back in time and interact with your younger self, what's one piece of advice you would give? I'll go to you first, Michael.
My younger self was a while ago. I think
that just means you're old, you've got more wisdom to impart.
Yeah, look, I really think it's important that you're enjoying what you're doing, that you sort of maybe enjoyment's not the right word. I think you certainly got to enjoy what you're doing, but you've got to be a clear picture of what you're doing, where you want to go, and what you want to be yourself, and not rely on what other people tell you. You can go to all sorts of, some of the training sessions you go to, they say do this, do that. I think you have to know what you want in life yourself and work to achieve that. I think that's important. I think you've got to get satisfaction out of your work. I would say sort of, if you're not getting satisfied, then perhaps you've got to look for a different role, because I think mainly you want to go to work, you want to do a job, you want to feel like it's worthwhile, and then leave work and go home and spend your time with your family and your friends. And to me, getting that sense of enjoyment, that sense of satisfaction out of your work is very important.
Okay, great, thanks. And for you, Katrina?
I guess I would say that you're going into a service that fosters growth and support, and that you're encouraged to enhance your skills, and that you'll work with some amazing and inspiring people in your time with the APS. We have had a few graduates come through the Murray-Parky region where I work, and the 3 that have come through have said they've learnt so much from getting out and engaging in the communities. So I would say get out and engage. Yeah,
okay. Excellent. Look, I think that's a really awesome note to end on. Given that we're just 3 minutes before our scheduled finish time, I think we better leave it there. But look, a big thank you to both of you, Michael and Katrina, for your time today, your willingness to engage with us, and your honesty in answering the questions. One of our aims, our key aim really, was to showcase something of the diversity of roles, but also the common ethos of service that underpins what the APS does. And I think that has come through clearly. So thank you very much for for participating. And look, thanks to everyone who's tuned in. Apologies for some of the technical issues we had, but we got those sorted out pretty quickly. Thanks for the questions, and thanks also to Pat Hetherington, who has had to leave, but for his time earlier. Before we close, I just thought I'd do a bit of a spruik for the social media presence that the APS has. So you might not know that the APS as an institution actually has its own presence on social media. So if you're interested in keeping up to speed on things that do affect the whole of the service, things across the service, do please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. The details are on the screen now, and it's a great opportunity. We here at the Commission, we manage those accounts and we do our best to try to, again, just showcase some of the diversity of work that takes place and some of the great achievements that people are achieving across the breadth of the workforce, both in Australia but also internationally. So look, with that, we'll shut off the live stream. Thanks to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.